After years of traveling all over the world, I've made some pretty big travel mistakes. I'm talking about things like accidentally driving through London congestion zones and getting hit with massive fines, missing out on seeing The Last Supper in Milan because tickets sell out months in advance, and almost ruining an entire trip to Mongolia because of one flight delay. So in this video, I'm sharing 10 things I would never do again while traveling and the lessons I learned the hard way. My hope is that by sharing these experiences, you can avoid making some of the same mistakes on your own trips. Stay tuned.
Welcome to World Wanderers.
We're Alicia and Will.
Come wander the world with us.
Let's start with one that almost ruined a once-in-a-lifetime experience. One thing I would never do again is schedule a long or complicated travel day right before something really important, like a cruise, a tour, or an expensive activity. Travel delays happen all the time. Flights get delayed, connections get missed, weather causes cancellations, and sometimes things just go wrong. My husband and I learned this the hard way on a trip to Mongolia. We had an incredible tour planned that started with a regional flight that only operates on certain days of the week. But because the travel delays getting there, we ended up arriving in Mongolia 24 hours later than planned. For a while, it looked like we might miss that regional flight entirely, which would have completely ruined the whole trip. Thankfully, we were able to get on a different flight from Istanbul to Mongolia the next day, but we cut it so close. Ever since then, whenever we have something expensive or time-sensitive planned, we always build in a buffer day or two, because the stress of almost missing something like that is just not worth it. Another mistake we made actually happened before the trip even started, when we were planning where to stay. Early in our travels, we made the mistakes of booking hotels before we had really figured out what activities we wanted to do. We did this in Iceland and also in Cusco, Peru. We booked our hotels first, thinking we'd just do day trips from there. But then once we started researching what we actually wanted to do, we realized that many of those activities were multi-day experiences. For example, if you're visiting Cusco, Peru, you might want to do a multi-day trek or spend nights closer to Machu Picchu. And in Iceland, if you're trying to do something like the Ring Road, you definitely can't stay in the same hotel the whole time. But by that point, we had already booked non-refundable hotels. Now we always plan our activities first and then book hotels that actually make sense with that itinerary. Speaking of planning mistakes, this next one cost us money and a lot of stress. One thing I would absolutely never do again is rent a car in a massive city like London. On one of our trips to England, we rented a car as soon as we arrived in London because we needed it for a later road trip throughout the countryside. But driving in London is incredibly stressful. You're driving on the opposite side of the road, sitting on the opposite side of the car, navigating unfamiliar roundabouts, and traffic is intense. But the real problem was the congestion zones. There are these areas of the city where you have to pay fees online just for driving through them. And we didn't realize we had entered those zones until weeks later when the fines started showing up in the mail. On top of that, parking was extremely expensive. So in hindsight, we absolutely should have just used public transportation in London and picked up the rental car after leaving the city. Now, this next mistake was especially painful because it involved a major bucket list experience, and that's not checking ticket availability for major attractions. If there's something you really want to see at a destination, it's incredibly important to check how far in advance tickets sell out. I learned this the hard way in Milan. One of the things I really wanted to see more than anything was the Last Supper painting, but I didn't realize that tickets often sell out months in advance. By the time I looked into it, there were no tickets left during the entire time we were there. And missing something like that at the very top of my bucket list for a city was incredibly disappointing. Now, whenever I plan a trip, one of the first things I check is whether there are major attractions that require advance tickets. Now, this next mistake isn't about logistics or planning. It's about something I wish I had understood earlier as a traveler. Back in 2015, we rode elephants during a trip to Zambia. At the time, we thought it was an amazing experience. The place we visited told us how the elephants were well treated and that they were trained using only positive reinforcement. But over time, I've learned a lot more about the reality behind elephant tourism. And now that I look back on that experience, it honestly makes me cringe. The truth is that riding elephants is widely considered unethical because of the way the animals are typically trained and treated. If I had known then what I know now, I never would have participated in that. And it's something I always research now before doing wildlife experiences. Another lesson we learned the hard way has to do with cruising. If you're booking a cruise specifically because of one or two ports, that can be a big mistake. Cruise lines can cancel or change ports for all kinds of reasons. weather, operational issues, mechanical problems, or even political situations. And the important thing to know is that they don't have to refund you if that happens. We've personally had cruise ports changed and canceled like 10 to 15 times. In fact, it happens often enough that we eventually realized something important. You should pick a cruise because you like the ship and generally like the itinerary, not because you're counting on one specific stop. The next lesson we learned has to do with something that's completely out of your control, the weather. Early on, we made the mistake of scheduling weather-dependent activities on the last day or two of a trip. But if the weather doesn't cooperate, you might lose your only chance. This happened to us on several bucket list experiences. In Rio de Janeiro, it was too foggy to see Christ the Redeemer. We went up to see it anyway, but it wasn't what we were hoping for. In Iceland, clouds completely blocked our chance to see the Northern Lights or take a Northern Lights tour. And in Egypt, we almost didn't get to do a hot air balloon ride over the Valley of the Kings because it was too windy. They actually tried inflating the balloon 3 separate times, and we were told that if it didn't work on the 3rd time, the flights that day would be canceled. Luckily, it worked at the last minute. But now, whenever possible, we try to schedule weather-dependent activities early in the trip so that we have the option to try again if needed. This next mistake is a little ironic because it involves staying somewhere beautiful. On a trip to Puerto Rico, we booked a beautiful hotel right next to the rainforest where we wanted to go hiking, and it seemed like the perfect idea. But what we didn't fully think through was the fact that rainforests get a lot of rain. And because our hotel was right next to it, it rained at our hotel every single day. So whether we wanted to relax by the pool or swim in the ocean, the weather was rainy and overcast. Meanwhile, areas just 30 minutes away were sunny. Now we pay more attention to microclimates when choosing where to stay. Another thing we didn't think about early in our travels was something surprisingly simple, not considering daylight hours. One year we visited Iceland over Christmas. We expected it to be cold, but what we didn't fully appreciate was how limited the daylight hours would be. At the time of year, there were only about 4 hours of daylight each day, and it wasn't even full daylight. It was more like a long twilight. So any activities we wanted to do had to be squeezed into that very short window. It made sightseeing much more challenging than we had expected. Now, whenever we plan winter trips to northern destinations, we always look up the daylight hours ahead of time. And finally, this last mistake was more of a cultural lesson that I learned during a trip to the Middle East. I once visited a water park in Bahrain while wearing what I thought was a very conservative one-piece swimsuit. But when I got there, I quickly realized I was the only woman in the entire park who was actually swimming. The only other women there were mothers sitting in chairs watching their children and wearing full burqas. It ended up being incredibly uncomfortable. Later, I learned that many places like this have a women's only hours where the staff and guests are all women. That allows women to enjoy the parks without worrying about cultural expectations or unwanted attention. And it's a good reminder that researching local customs and norms can make a big difference while traveling. Travel is one of the most rewarding things you can do, but it's also something you get better at with experience. And while I definitely wish I had known some of these things earlier, each mistake taught me something valuable. Hopefully sharing these lessons helps you avoid making some of the same mistakes on your own trips. And I'd love to hear from you too. What's a travel mistake that you've learned the hard way? Let me know in the comments so we can all learn from each other. And if you're interested in more travel tips, I also have a video about 15 ways I stay organized while traveling, which can help make your trips much smoother. I'll link that one next. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Safe travels.